Good evening. Thank you for joining us here for KREM News 10 at 10, where we give you more news in less time. Let's get started. Gubernatorial candidates Bob Ferguson and Dave Reichert making their pitches to Washingtonians tonight. We are bringing you complete team coverage of tonight's debate. KREM 2's Mark Hanrahan coming to us now live from Seattle with reaction from the questions he personally asked those candidates about issues right here in Eastern Washington. First, though, we are turning things over to KREM 2's Cody Proctor, who has been following this race closely and has a recap on tonight's debate. Cody?
Well, Whitney, this is the first time that gubernatorial candidates Bob Ferguson and Dave Reichert faced each other after they advanced past the August primary. Now, last half hour, we looked at the responses in regards to the budget and taxes, as well as protections for farm workers. This time, we're taking a look at access to abortion. That also proved to be a big issue that was addressed tonight. One of the questions touched on the issue of more out-of-state patients seeking an abortion in Washington after the Supreme Court struck down Roe versus Wade.
We'll be making sure we make investments as a state to make sure that all women, whether coming from out of state or within state, are able to access the full range of reproductive freedom, which again is a critical difference in this case.
I will protect those laws and work with our members of the House and the state legislature to Senate to protect access to abortions.
Now, another key issue of the night that was talked about was the impacts of forced boarding schools in Native American history. The two were asked on how they would help tribes still deal with the trauma.
They're working with the tribes and making those safe places for our children and the families of our indigenous community members.
What has gone on with boarding schools in our state, just like in other states, is a true tragedy. And I've heard that loud and clear from tribal leaders and tribal members as I've met all across the state.
Now, of course, these are just snippets from tonight's debate. Coming up at 11 o'clock, we'll hear from both candidates on their stances on public safety and the homeless crisis in the state. And if you want to see the full debate, you can go to our website, KREM.com. You can also check out KREM 2 Plus or KREM's YouTube page. In the newsroom, Cody Proctor, KREM 2 News.
Cody, thank you very much. And again, our very own Mark Hanrahan was one of the moderators of tonight's gubernatorial debate. He asked the candidates questions on the issues that impact voters right here in Eastern Washington. Mark is joining us now live from the King 5 newsroom in Seattle. Mark, we know voters will decide the future of the state's Climate Commitment Act. So where do the candidates stand on that issue?
Yeah, we covered a lot of territory tonight, the Climate Commitment Act being one of the questions. But this debate quickly got lively out the gate. The first topic, public safety. We had Reichert going after Ferguson, trying to paint him as being weak on crime. And we had Ferguson continually trying to tie Reichert to Donald Trump throughout. At one point, they even called each other liars during debate. We did, though, ask him about issues specific to the inland Northwest, including transportation and the North Spokane corridor. Neither candidate really addressed the North Spokane corridor specifically. In terms of the Climate Commitment Act, I asked them about the initiative that would repeal the CCA and where they stand on that. Take a listen. On the fate of 4 initiatives, including I-2117, which would repeal the state's Climate Commitment Act, which calls for having the state's largest polluters pay for carbon emissions. Are you going to vote for this initiative? And if not, what should the state's role be in fighting climate change?
So I'll be voting no on the initiative. In other words, I'm opposed to repealing the Climate Commitment Act. And just want to elaborate that for a moment. This will be a critical issue facing our voters. And I believe that the Climate Commitment Act needs to be adjusted. For example, farmers are entitled to an exemption under the Climate Commitment Act. That hasn't happened yet. When I'm elected governor, I've met with farmers in Odessa. We're going to make sure that the state follows through on the promise to make sure those farmers get the exemption they're entitled to.
And here's what's bothersome. The voters did not have an opportunity to really voice their opinions in this case. So I say, let's vote yes, pay less, and then let's have a discussion with the members of our state legislature and find a way forward that's not placing the cost of green, clean energy efforts on the backs of hardworking Washingtonians.
And this question will go to you, Mr. Ferguson, first. All right, so who came out on top tonight? Well, that's up to voters. This was their first televised debate. Their next one, that's coming up on September 18th. The location for that debate, Spokane. In Seattle tonight, I'm Mark Hanrahan. for KREM 2 News.
Mark, thank you very much. And KREM 2 is committed to bringing you more to every story this election season. We will be hosting a 5th District congressional debate on Wednesday, October 30th. Candidates Carmela Conroy and Michael Baumgartner will be here in the KREM 2 studios to answer questions, again, that are important to people right here in Eastern Washington. It's an hour-long commercial-free debate that will start at 7 o'clock that evening on KREM 2, KSKN 22, as well as KREM's digital streaming platforms. So make sure to save the date for our 5th District congressional debate on October 30th. And both of those candidates are fighting to replace Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers. I recently sat down with the Eastern Washington representative to talk about her 20 years as a U.S. lawmaker and her final few months in office. What are you most proud of?
Oh, it's hard to nail down one thing, but I hope that people see me as a representative that they can trust and that cared.
Politics has changed a lot in 20 years. Right now, it feels like voters on both sides share a lot of frustration. What is your message to voters here in Eastern Washington? So you will hear her answer to that question and much more from our interview. That's tomorrow night on KREM 2 News at 6. And this wasn't the only debate, of course, going on this evening. Former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris facing off just a few hours ago in the battleground state of Pennsylvania for their first and possibly only presidential debate. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brandt has details now from Philadelphia.
Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump took the debate stage in Philadelphia in their first ever meeting face-to-face.
I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again.
With polls showing a razor-tight race just 8 weeks until Election Day, they tackled issues top of mind for voters, including the economy and inflation.
We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before.
My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses.
The two went head-to-head on abortion.
This is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years.
The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
They sparred over immigration.
We have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums.
What we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
Trump repeated a baseless claim about migrants abducting and eating pets in Ohio. Officials say there's no evidence.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
You talk about extreme.
The candidates were also asked about the peaceful transfer of power.
So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say we don't have to go back.
We have to have good elections. Our elections are bad.
This was Trump's 7th presidential debate, Harris's first, an opportunity for her to define herself and explain her policy positions to voters.
And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
If she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance.
This is currently the only debate scheduled between the two candidates, though both sides have signaled they're open to at least one more. Natalie Brandt, CBS News, Philadelphia.
All right, we are switching gears now to take a first look at the forecast with our chief meteorologist, Jeremy Legoo.
Well, when it comes to the overall weather pattern, it's a bit cooler in the days to come. Today, we topped out at a pretty warm 81 degrees here in Spokane, 87 up in Deer Park, 90 out in Moses Lake and Pasco, close to it down in Lewiston. But all of that heat is making its way out. There's our storm system, and attached to it, we have a frontal boundary. That cold front is working its way in, and as it does so, we are going to wind up seeing the impacts of that here in the next few hours. I think the rain starts in, I would say, southeast Washington and the southern panhandle in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. we'll say. It then moves in, and I think we wake up to a round of showers tomorrow morning. A bulk of that activity winds up in North Idaho through much of the day tomorrow. And then in the afternoon, we might catch a few peaks of sunshine. And for that reason, I think we still make it into the 70s, even if barely. More showers Thursday, then drying out and warming up for the weekend.
All right, Jeremy, thank you. And that was KREM 2 News 10 at 10, where you get more news in less time.